This is Nicholas from Silicon Chip Magazine, and today I'd like to talk to you about a preview of this article that is coming up in our November issue that's published late October, so it goes on sale in a couple of weeks from today. And this is the RP2350B computer. Now, this is not like, say, the Raspberry Pi 5, which is essentially a complete computer, maybe less powerful than you might be used to, but very capable of running Linux generally, running an operating system that has to boot and that can run all sorts of software. This is a much more specialized board. The RP2350B is the chip that comes on the Raspberry Pi Pico 2 microcontroller module. Well, the B version doesn't. The A version is what comes on that module. The B version is a slightly bigger version of the chip, and basically its advantage is just that it has more pins, so it can control more different things. So this board, one of the nice things about this board is that you can buy it basically fully assembled. So you just plug it in and away you go, similar to a Raspberry Pi. The design files are available, so it's an open design. You can modify it if you want. You can have it made for you if you want. If you want 10, you can order 10 from JLC and they'll make them for you. So you can also customize it in terms of what's on the board and what isn't. That's a very handy design. Unlike the previous similar computer that we published, that one actually had a Raspberry Pi Pico 2 soldered to it. So you had to solder that. This one, the chip is on the board. The only soldering that needs to be done is if you want more RAM, you can solder an 8-pin RAM chip on there, which is pretty straightforward. And you can also see here that it fits nicely in a plastic case, and there are front and rear panels that are actually made like PCBs, but they're just panels with holes and labeling. So it makes a neat little package. 4 USB ports on the front for things like keyboard, mice, game controllers. There's a console USB port, micro SD card socket, and you can see on the back there's HDMI, another USB-C socket for power, a reset button, audio jack, and this board has a proper audio DAC, so there's decent quality audio output, which might make this attractive as some kind of a music player or something like that, a media center. And then importantly, we have a pin header here with a bunch of connections for power, ground, and IOs. So you can use this like an embedded controller to control hardware very easily. Now, I mentioned the Raspberry Pi 5 earlier. That's a very powerful computer, but like a computer, it has to boot up, it takes time, etc. This thing does have an operating system, and it's called MMBasic. And it's a basic interpreter similar to what you might get if you remember on something like a Commodore 64 or an Apple II, where you switch it on and you're immediately at a basic prompt. You can set it up to run your code straight away. So it can be basically a seamless device where you just power it on and away it goes. It does its job. It might show something on the screen. It might have keyboard input, mouse input, or it might be completely autonomous and just control something via these pins. So it's very handy like that. It's easy to program because it's basic. And it boots pretty much instantly, and it's basically real time because all it's running is your code. And with that Raspberry Pi processor, there are 2 cores, so you can actually have one dedicated to real-time I/O and such like that if you want to. So it has a dual-core Cortex M33. I believe the specified clock speed is 133 megahertz, something like that. But this board is designed to run it quite a bit faster, between 252 and 375 megahertz. So obviously that gives you more performance, but it also means that you can generate HDMI video signals because it's too slow to do that at 133. And it achieves that by having a quieter and better regulated power supply than a Pico board, and also an adjustable one. There's a trim pot on there, so you can set it to deliver a bit more voltage to the core so that it's stable at those higher clock speeds. You can store programs and data on the flash that's next to the main processor. So not only does that contain the MMBasic operating system code, it also can contain your own user data. And of course, you also have the micro SD card socket if you want to store even more data. And then we have 220 kilobytes of RAM. And if you want to add this extra chip on, then you have around 6 megabytes to play with. As I mentioned, there is internal storage, 14 megabytes. That's enough for a lot of basic code and files and such. The SD card can be up to 32 gigabytes. The HDMI video supports resolutions from 640 by 480 up to 1280 by 720 or 1024 by 768. Now, that is with a limited range of colors or monochrome. you can have more colors, but it will drop the resolution because it's limited in RAM. I mean, it only has a few megabytes of RAM. Anyway, as I mentioned, it has a good quality audio output, 2 volts RMS, full audio frequency range stereo via a dedicated uh, digital to analog converter chip. So better than a lot of the previous boards, and even the Raspberry Pi 5 doesn't have that. It just uses PWM, which is fairly basic unless you add a hat. This supports audio playback of WAV, FLAC, MP3, and mod files. I mentioned the USB ports, keyboard, mouse, gamepad support. It has an onboard real-time clock. That's what the battery cell holder is for. You can put a 3-volt lithium cell there so that the time and date are kept track of even when it's not powered. Has a serial over USB console, 30-pin I/O connector with 22 input-output pins, many of which are capable of analog. I think there are 6 or 7 analog pins and quite a few PWM capable pins as well. And it draws 220 millivolts at 5 volts from a USB-C power supply, and that's pretty much any USB supply will power it. Here's the I/O header pin map. As I mentioned, there are here are the 7 analog pins in black, and then we have virtually every pin. Basically, every I/O pin is PWM capable. Most of them also can be serial port or I2C or SPI. So very flexible input output there to control lots of different things connected by this header. That's one of the best features of this board, is it's really easy to connect hardware to. Here's the circuit of the board. You can see it's dominated by the RP2350B chip, but there are quite a few support components here. There's the HDMI connector, the I/O connector, the RAM and flash chips, SD card socket. Here's the audio DAC, reset supervisor, regulator. So there's the 3.3 volt I/O rail, just a basic regulator for that. And then we have this adjustable regulator for the DVDD core rail. And you use VR1 to adjust that voltage depending on how fast you want it to run. Another thing that helps overclock it is that there's actually a crystal oscillator module. So that provides a nice stable clock to boost up to the full clock speed. Here's the real-time clock. Here's the USB hub, 4-port hub, I believe it's USB 2 with indicator LEDs. And then here's the USB serial chip for the console. So it looks like a big complicated circuit, but actually it's just a bunch of different sections, each of which is basically one chip that does one job. So it's relatively straightforward. And the nice thing is, if you don't want to care about this, you don't have to, because you can just buy the board, plug in the power supply, plug in a keyboard and mouse, and away you go. And something like this is also really great for learning how to program, because BASIC is built in, which is intended to be easy to learn, and you don't have to do anything else. You can just start writing programs with it. So that's why computers like the Apple II and Commodore 64 were so popular, or part of the reason, back in the 1980s. Here's the list of parts. Again, you don't really need to concern yourself with this, because virtually all of them will come on the pre-assembled board, and you can download the files that are sent to the manufacturer that specifies what goes where if you want. Here's a layout showing where all the components go, what it looks like in the case, and advice on building it, and so on. Some of the commands that you can use to set up the software, because the software that's running on this is actually flexible, designed to be used on a range of different boards, so it has different options, but it's pretty simple to set it up for this. It's basically a single command to set it up for this board, because it's designed specifically for it. Information on setting the display, adjusting the clock speed, and so on. So, and there are some games that you can run on it if you want. That should be familiar. Obviously that's not Pac-Man. It just looks a lot like Pac-Man, and that's not Tetris. It's called Blocks, but it's remarkably similar. And as I mentioned earlier, this board is available pre-assembled. So you have 2 basic options. You can download the design files for free. You can go to a company like JLC PCB and you can have them make you this board. I believe the minimum quantity is 2. So that's up to you. The other option is to buy the board from us. We have in stock already these boards pre-assembled with everything except the RAM chip, and we can also sell the RAM chip separately if you want to put that on. So the basic price is 90 Australian dollars for this assembled module, $5 for the RAM chip, and $7.50 for the front and rear panels if you want to put it in a case. But keep in mind that subscribers to Silicon Chip Magazine get a 10% discount, so it would be $81 for the board, $4.50 for the optional RAM chip, and $6.25 for the front and rear panels. And then if you want to put it in the case, you can get the case separately. We don't sell that, but it's available from a couple of different retailers. So a few different options there for getting this board. And the good news is you hardly have to do anything. If you want to put the RAM chip on, you do that. Otherwise, it's ready to go as soon as you receive it. So thanks for listening. I hope you find this article interesting, and make sure to check out the November 2025 issue of Silicon Chip when it goes on sale at the end of October. Thank you.